Hello, everybody. Yeah, welcome to Just for Women Africa. My name is Ololekun Amusa. Today on the show, we'll have us Ada Ari. Ada Ari is an author. She writes children's books, concentrating on African folk tales. And she'll be talking to us about that, on how she got into the business, and anything that comes up during the interview. So stick around, and we'll be right back. Hello, Ada. Yeah, welcome to Just for Women Africa.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, welcome, Ada. Okay, Ada, could you tell us how did you get into the business of writing books, children's books about African folk tales?
My children were my inspiration. I have today a 6-year-old and soon to be 5-year-old, and we are growing up in the United States. So as I was reading to them stories that we find here and books that we find here, I thought about all the great stories that I heard growing up in Nigeria, but that you will not hear in this part of the world. And I wanted them to have those same stories and enjoy them as well. So I thought, why not write them down in storybooks? And the rest, as they say, is history.
That's interesting, Ada. All right, Ada, could you tell us how did you get started? How much did you start with? And how many books did you start writing when you got started?
So I have two different book products. One of them are my folktale books. So I have three of those. I'm working on my fourth one. And then I also have the largest collection to date of board books solely dedicated to the Africa's languages. And that's where I have 18 languages. I also started that because of my children. I wanted them to learn our native language, which was Igbo. And I started it out with my sister-in-law, co-founder. So we were both looking to just get resources for our children to learn the language. So Igbo was the first one we started with. But as we kind of wrapped up and got ready to launch the Igbo language, we're like, wait, there are so many other people who would like the same thing, that we're sure would like the same thing. So we started off actually with 4 languages. We did Igbo, Yoruba, Igbo, Yoruba, Tree, which is Ghanaian, and Swahili, because Swahili is the most popular African spoken language. And then Yoruba and Igbo, of course, like two of the three main Nigerian languages, and we're Nigerian. But as you said, now we're at 18 in a very short period of time because as we grew, people heard about what we were doing and they were just so interested. And we've been getting requests for more languages, and we're just looking to feed the request because this is a very underserved market. Africans really maintaining and keeping our culture, our tradition, our legacy together and documented. I think it's something that needs to be done and needs to be done more of.
Okay, now talking about your books, could you tell us what age bracket are they targeting?
So a wide variety. I actually am just coming from a school here in the United States, and my folktale books are read by people, even middle school students enjoy this, and this is like, early teens. But my folktale books, they're all picture books. So I wrote them with my young children in mind. The language books, those are also really great I find even adults use it just to start learning a language, but I created them with my young children in mind as well. So toddlers, even babies to have like kind of their parents or grandparents reading and teaching them the language. And as they start to get older into elementary school, they can start learning how to read and write in their own native languages as well.
Okay, then. All right. You started off your books with Igbo, Yoruba, Twi, and Swahili. I mean, those are languages you do not speak. So how do you get to write the books in those other languages? Do you get consultants coming in to help you out?
Oh, absolutely. Growing up, actually, I used to wish that I could speak all the languages in the world at the same time. And I had no idea how many languages those were, but I've always been passionate about languages. Sadly, I don't speak all the languages, but I work really closely with consultants, like you said, people who are certified in speaking the languages to get the books translated, and then to create these sets for people.
Currently, Ada, you have 18 books in 18 languages for your children's books, and also have for the folktales. Do you plan on expanding and adding more languages to the books?
Absolutely. So the goal is to keep growing and to represent as many different African languages as possible. And as you can imagine, there are thousands of languages to cover. So as long as there's a demand or a request for it, and enough of a demand for it, I'd say, we want to keep adding those languages.
Okay, Ada, in your books, what kind of messages do you communicate to the children? What are the kind of things do they learn?
So now we're segueing from my language books, which are the board books, to my folktale books. The folktale books, folktales are something that you find across cultures all over the world. here in the United States, we hear a lot of like your Little Red Riding Hood, your Jack and the Beanstalk. These are all stories that have really traversed the world, a lot of them originating in Europe. And folk tales, they kind of do the same thing around the world. They are ways to preserve culture, but they are also ways to pass on moral lessons to children. My folk tale books are they're very much the same. I'm retelling stories that have existed for generations in different countries throughout different countries in Africa, but a lot of them have really good morals. So the very first one I started with is the turtle's cracked shell, and that's a story that I heard growing up. It's the one I remembered and the one that I wrote down by heart. But the moral lesson there is also in sharing and being kind. There's also elements of forgiveness because in my retelling, his friends helped him to put the shell back. And I'm probably giving away the plot to people who haven't read it but might want to. But
Yeah.
that's an example of the kind of message that we're passing around, right? It's that you should share, you should be kind. In my retelling of the Ghanaian story, Anansi the Spider, I tell it to really bring out the moral lesson of listening to your parents because the reason spiders have long legs right now is because Anansi the spider did not listen to exactly what his mom told him to do. And with every book, there's some sort of moral lesson that children can understand and relate to. Children globally and parents globally will want to have these messages shared with their children as well, or also instilled in them. In addition to just telling a really fun and engaging story, I wanted my books to be vehicles that my children could use to share their culture and their tradition. So at the back of each of my picture books, my folktale picture books, there's a map of Africa. And for each book, each story, you can tell the country the story comes from. So, for example, the turtle's crack shell that I talked about, that's a Nigerian story. On the back of the book, you're going to see Nigeria shaded out. Anansi the spider, we talk about it coming from the Ashanti kingdom in Ghana, and Ghana is actually shaded out in the map. There's one I have for it's a Zulu story. You see South Africa shaded out. So another message or another big thing that comes out of my books is a geography lesson and learning about the fact that Africa is a continent with many different countries, many different cultures, different people. And then lastly, on the inside of each of my books, I have these culture cards. And so, in addition to learning about the country and where it is, and also in addition to hearing a really fun story with great morals, you get to learn about the people who brought the stories to us. So, you learn about people like Shaka Zulu, for example. You learn about the Kente cloth. You learn about kola nuts, those kinds of things.
Okay, Ada, I wanted to ask, how do you go around choosing the theme and the messages for your books when you write?
So I retell folk tales that have existed in the public domain for generations, for centuries. And so in that regard, it's fairly easy because I'm not having to create a brand new story. That's where the ease ends because I'm also retelling these stories. A lot of the folk tales that we know today and we pass down to our children, a lot of them are stories that would not really quite pass muster in today's world. There are even some of these European folk tales that Disney and other companies have had to massage and kind of retell in different ways just for today's audience. So each of these stories they exist, but my job, what I do when I tell them is I make sure that it's applicable in today's world and for a broader audience. I want to bring people into an understanding and I want to welcome them into our cultures. So I want to make sure it's something that children of all backgrounds can relate to. Um, so that's kind of what I do when I retell these stories. And where I get the inspiration from is just literally looking at, fortunately, my children who are in the same age bracket. What are some of the good lessons that I want them to leave with? Many times, these stories have them already baked in there. It's just a matter of really pulling it to the surface. Other times, it's like you have to really pull that out. So, for example, the story that I'm working on right now, it's a Kenyan folktale from the Kikuyu tribe. It's the original story is about teenage sacrifice, but I've switched it to pull out the components of bravery and how children around the world for many years have had to stand really brave in face of many adults' decisions and battles. So I'm kind of bringing out the moral lesson of
Okay, then let's switch over to the business side of things. You have a beautiful website. I've been to your social media handles; they're really, really good. Of course, you did encounter challenges. Could you tell us some of the challenges you encountered when setting up your business?
Whew. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I did not go into this expecting it to be any sort of business. I really just wanted to create something for my children. And I had no idea that there would be such interest in the products I was creating. So I think one of the biggest challenges is just the fact that this was very serendipitous. It grew very organically. And by that, I mean that I constantly playing catch up. I mean, maybe not so much today, but the initial phases, you're constantly playing catch up. I remember very vividly, I created my books and I thought that it would be pretty like simple and easy. But by the time the books were here, I was like, oh my gosh, this was a massive investment. How do I recoup? And I was struggling to figure out how to get people to even hear about my books. And so I would go to indoor playgrounds because this was in the US and in February that I launched my first book. So February is winter, children are not outdoors, they're all indoors. But I was looking for indoor playgrounds where there would be kids who might be interested or who these books might might work for. And so I would say, hey, can I come and read in your space for free? In the hopes that after reading, people will come in and they would want to buy the books. It was very hit or miss. My very first one was a huge success. Everyone came, everyone sat down. It was a packed room. There were a few purchases. The purchases were very much hit or miss. So there was no guarantee of like a return. But it helped me learn how to read to and present to children in that age group. Also, it helped me gain exposure. So the very first bookstore who ever bought my books, um, one of the manager's mom was in that room when I was reading for the first time, for example. And so a lot of exposure came from all these different activities that I did. And when I started going into schools to read, I remember the very first school I went to read and they were like, oh, okay, so where's all your business information? Where's your invoice? Where's your tax information? And I was like, what? What are all these things? So again, I was always playing catch up. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to get that. So I had to now go and learn how to register a business and all these things because prior to that, this was just for fun. So one of the most challenging things, especially in the beginning, is playing catch up. And then today, I think it's just a matter of structuring, organizing, creating those processes because I'm still in my head like, oh, wow, I'm expanding from a hobby to a legitimate business with staff and, goals and things like that.
Yeah, that. You're presently based in the United States, and I'd like to know, do you have plans on expanding your business, making your books available to people outside the United States, Europe, Asia, and in Africa?
So for my language books, I actually have them currently available in multiple countries around the world, from Canada to Australia, Ghana, Nigeria, Germany, UK. They're in almost every continent. And I find that it's because Africans are in the diaspora all over the world. So that was kind of easy to do. With the picture books is a very challenging industry because there are so many people, so many authors in that space. And so it's a matter of like really standing out where there are so many other people doing the same thing you're doing. So to date, my books are available in the US, but I'm now starting to expand to make those books available in the diaspora, well, around the world, really. Started off with Canada, and I'm moving into Nigeria and the UK, and then looking to see how much further I can take those books.
Okay, Ada, could you tell us what's the future for your business and your books?
Let's see where it goes. Right now, my goal is to really get a lot more exposure and awareness about the books, my brand in general. And then I would love to move into other features. I would love to get my language books. I would love to create second and third generations. Right now, my language books, they're just, my first words, but I want to build up on that so that people who maybe started engaging with my brand when their children were young can still find products that they can engage with as their children get older. And I also want to be able to cover as many different African languages as possible. And with the fairly similar goals with the picture books, I want to make sure that I have as many different folk tales from different countries in Africa covered, and then I want to make sure that they are available around the world. So those are some of the low hanging fruits that I'm currently working on.
Okay, so could you tell us what has been some of the feedback from the parents so far towards your books?
It's been very amazing, overwhelmingly positive. I think the one thing is just like the desire for more languages, more advanced products. So I'm running as fast as I can. It just goes to show that there's just so much need and desire there, right? Like that's a very underserved market, as I mentioned earlier. and I'm looking to find the right partnerships and the right ways to really meet those needs.
Okay, thank you so much for being on the show. Wish you all the best. We look forward to intervening again in future.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, and to our viewers who are watching, go out, get Adari's books. They're on her website, adari.com. And to our viewers who are watching, don't forget to like, subscribe, tell a friend who knows a friend about Just Women Africa. And from Adar all the way in the United States, it'll be bye.